Imagine paying dues to an HOA that decides your family's lake is their private playground, and then, when they won't stop trespassing, you simply turn a wheel and the water takes your land back. Wild thought. Right. What would you do if 139 shiny luxury cabins suddenly appeared on your shore and you controlled the dam? My name's Jack McCloud. Folks around here know me as the quiet guy up on the ridge with the old stone house and the stubborn dog. I'm not fancy. I'm not new money. I'm fifth generation Appalachian mud calloused hands. Boots that keep a memory of every season. And a head full of numbers. 'Cause, well, I'm a hydrological engineer. Yeah, I know. It ain't the sexiest job title, but water makes sense to me. Water's honest. It goes where gravity points, not where a board president waves her little newsletter. This story starts like 100 bad HOA stories you've heard late at night on the porch. Except, it ends with gravity doing all the talking. The place is Lakeview Crest Estates, a gated community that sprouted up next to my family's land a few years back. The realtor brochures had white smiles and perfect kayaks. The drone shots made the hills look like a national park that served charcuterie. And sitting front and center in those photos was my lake, our lake, McCloud Lake. A blue bowl my great-great-grandfather carved into a rocky valley a century ago. He was Angus McCloud, a civil engineer back when men wore hats to do math. In the roaring 1920s, when the hills were still stubborn and the creeks walked fast, he spotted a narrow gorge where three big creeks clenched hands. With local stone and stubborn patience, he built a cyclopean masonry dam, no glamorous Art Deco thing, just stout and over-engineered, like a good old truck that never quits. The lake, filled slow, changed the cold breath of the valley, and turned a mud hollow into 700 acres of quiet water. He raised a small timber and stone lodge on a high shoulder of land and wrote everything down: flow rates, spillway figures, inspection notes in neat engineer's cursive that still smells faintly of pipe smoke when I open his books. I mean, you can almost hear the slide rule, the deed to the lake, the dam, and the lake bed right up to the natural high water mark sits in a trust under my name. It's one of those old-fashioned chains of paper that says, in plain words, this water answers to a McCloud. We've kept the structure up, paid the taxes, mowed the service roads, and never asked a soul for a penny to look at the sunset. For almost a century, nobody questioned it. Then came the developer with the slick hair and the smooth boots. They called themselves Summit and Pine because, of course they did, and they bought the tract my great-grandfather sold off in the 1970s to cover a state mess. Summit and Pine carved cul-de-sacs into the slope, named every curve something like Birch View or Eagle Run, and installed a gate with a keypad that beeped like it meant business. And then, like a thunderhead you didn't see building, the HOA arrived. The inaugural president introduced herself in a glossy welcome packet. Hello, neighbors. I'm Karen. Now, listen. I'm not using Karen as a joke. That was her actual name. And it was also, it fit. Early 60s. White on white, luxury SUV. Resort wear that squeaked when it moved. She smiled, a smile that only touched teeth, never eyes. And from day one, she talked like the lake was a community amenity that had been graciously provided by the universe for her committee to schedule. It started small, passive-aggressive newsletters with clip art. We remind all residents to enjoy the beautiful community lake responsibly. Cute. Then came emails from her board address Jack. Your personal dock is out of alignment with the community aesthetic. Please consult the approved color palette. I sent back a neighborly note. Ma'am, your authority ends at the row of iron property pins. My dock's color is driftwood. Maybe I added a "have a great day" that did not sound like a hug. She did not like that. People like Karen, there's people who live on applause. Tell them no. And they hear a challenge. I could feel the air change. She started using phrases like shared asset and collective enjoyment, as if the lake had always been waiting for her checklist. So I did the sensible neighbor thing. I had the entire border resurveyed. All 2,000 acres of our family tract, with fresh coordinates and bright orange flagging tape fluttering like truth. Those iron pins older than her HOA lined up exactly where Angus had left them. Every corner, every bend. Precise as the day the stone settled in mortar. Didn't matter. The next newsletter unveiled the Lakeview Recreation Reserve, a beach, a fishing pier, a volleyball court, and a kayak launch. Very tasteful renderings. You could practically hear soft jazz. Problem: every pixel of it sat on my land. I sent a cease and desist through my lawyer Sam Whitaker. A tall, dry man who speaks like he bills by the syllable. Calm. Firm. Attached the county plat. Attached my fresh survey. Attached a polite invitation to stop trespassing. Karen came back with a special board email full of sugar. We've retained a surveyor who filed an updated plat. There appears to be a discrepancy. Moving forward as planned. Down at the county records office smells like dust and coffee. I found the new plat. I'll give the faker this subtle work. The boundary line jogged out a few hundred feet along the lake, like a polite elbow in a crowded church pew. Enough of a nudge to swallow 50 acres of my shoreline, the gentle cove they wanted to pave with volleyball. The seal looked real. The signature looked legal. But it was wrong. My family's deed chain could be taught in a law school class on Don't Try It. I dug like a McLeod. I pulled Angus's original deeds from the 1920s, the sale paperwork from the 1970s, and the modern survey I'd paid for. Then I took my GPS rover precision down to the inch. If you treat her right and walked every pin, every oak shadow, every creek bend, the data cloud that came back was so tight you could bounce a quarter off it. And the surveyor Karen used, he'd lost his license 2 years prior for falsifying municipal drawings. He was not allowed to file anything. That, friend, is what they call a smoking gun that smokes in capital letters. We sent the whole packet again. Karen didn't blink. At the HOA meeting, held in a clubhouse that still smelled like new carpet, she held my report up like it was a rotten tomato. This is a harassment campaign by a disgruntled local jetter, she said. And the room applauded on cue. Her board nodded like bobbleheads glued to a dashboard. The vote to proceed passed without a hiccup. Bulldozers arrived on Monday. Steel teeth crossed my line like it was a suggestion. They shaved 100-year oaks down to stumps and called it grading. I called the sheriff. The deputy, young, polite, trying to keep shoes clean, looked at 2 maps and sighed. Civil dispute, he said. Palms up. Y'all need court. Karen smiled like she'd practiced it. Delay was part of the budget. Sam filed for an injunction. But the docket groaned with bigger fires. And the soonest hearing sat 6 months away. Karen heard 6 months and read it as, make it permanent. She didn't build a beach. She built an empire. Phase 2 rolled out like a gala, The Summit Cabins, an exclusive collection of rustic luxury waterfront rentals. 139 units. Prefab, but pricey. Concrete slabs. HV. Little decks with fake barnwood. They squeeze them into every dip along the stolen 50 acres. Shoulder to shoulder. Like a subdivision of toasters. You could hear hammers from dawn to dusk. And the white SUV crept the site like a patrol boat. Sometimes Karen would park by the upper trail below my lodge, stand with her hands on her hips, and stare up the hill, like she could boss the sun, while they poured concrete. I went back to Angus's study. The room has oak shelves and a window that looks straight down the dam's spine. I opened the leather-bound journal from 1928 and found what I needed. He'd written, "Neat as a chalkboard. The lake's natural maximum elevation, the real high water mark, the valley topography would reach without human trimming, was 1,845 feet above sea level. For everyday safety and recreation." He designed the primary sluice gates to keep the lake at 1,838 feet. 7 feet between normal and full, an engineered cushion. He'd sized the spillway in the masonry to ride out those 7 feet without breaking a sweat. Even in a so-called generational flood, 7 feet. That was the magic number. 7 clean vertical feet of lawful water I could bring back at any time for maintenance, inspection, or safety, exactly as written into the deed. I pulled topo maps, laid them out under a desk lamp, and traced contour lines with a pencil like a kid planning treasure. My lodge sat well above 1,850 feet. The stolen strip ran gentle, like a handrail along the shore. Their brand new slab foundations started around 1,839 feet and topped out just shy of 1,844. In other words, every pretty little rental, every designer deck, every gas fireplace sat inside the lake bed's flood easement. The 7-foot cushion Angus left for safety. They hadn't just trespassed. They'd pitched tents on the bottom of a lake that was politely resting, down in the dam. The old heart was sound. 2 main sluice gates north and south, moved by heavy cast-iron wheels in a cool concrete gallery. No buttons. No touchscreens. You turn the wheels by hand, hundreds of turns to move a gate. Slow on purpose, so you can't do anything dumb in a hurry. I spent a week greasing fittings, checking seals, brushing dust off indicator needles. The steel groaned like an old wrestler stretching, but everything was right where Angus left it. I documented like a zealot. Time-lapse cameras watched the shoreline. Drone photos with the 1,845-foot contour highlighted in red. Measurements on every slab elevation. Reports to the state environmental folks about silt fences missing. Riparian buffers bulldozed. Septic plans scribbled in crayon. They sent notices. Karen treated them like junk mail. Her faith was in 3 things: momentum, cosmetics, and paper delays. One more thing: the law. Sam read every paragraph twice. The deed spelled out my riparian rights and my duty to maintain the dam's integrity. We drafted a letter in firm, polite lawyer speak that said, in essence, you have constructed 139 unlawful structures inside the McLeod Dam flood easement for structural inspection and routine maintenance. The water will be restored to its documented natural maximum elevation of 1,845 feet. You have 48 hours to remove all personnel and property from the easement zone. Consider this formal notice. We sent it certified. Signature required. Karen signed. I pictured her scoffing as the pen scratched, tossing the letter aside like a menu she didn't order from. 48 hours later. Little trucks were still rolling in with furniture and potted plants. Curtains were going up. Firewood was stacked like a photo shoot. The morning was calm and gray. The kind of mountain overcast that makes every sound feel close. It all felt, theatrical. As if somebody had dressed a set for a disaster movie where the monster comes in at 1 inch per hour. 9 in the morning. To the minute. I drove to the dam with a thermos. A portable speaker playing old rock that sounded like summer. And a stomach full of the kind of quiet you get before a hard job. I called the sheriff's office. As the owner and operator of the McCloud Dam, I'm commencing routine, non-emergency maintenance to raise the lake gradually to 1,845 feet over the next 12 to 24 hours. Adjacent owners were notified in writing. The dispatcher sounded puzzled but polite. "We'll note it." I called Sam. He said, "Godspeed." Then, "Don't wink at anybody." In the gallery, the air smelled like cool stone and machine oil. I set my hands on the north gate wheel cold iron, rough with age, and started turning. At first it resisted like a mule. Then, the gearing woke up low. Strong. Inevitable. The needle on the wall inched from closed toward open. And somewhere deep under the water, a slab of steel slid like a door in an old castle. I walked to the south wheel and did it again. Then back. Then again. Hundreds of turns. Steady. The outflow narrowed. The 3 creeks feeding the basin kept pouring in. The lake, patient as a clock, began to rise. You wouldn't notice if you weren't watching, but I was. From my promontory, with binoculars that can read a license plate at 100 yards, I saw the first line of damp dark in the fresh turf in front of the lowest row of cabins just before noon. By early afternoon, the water kissed the edges of concrete. A foreman in a neon vest stood with his hands on his hips. Then, put one hand on his phone and started drawing shapes in the air no one could understand. By mid-afternoon, the first slab was an island. Pallets of unused flooring bobbed like gray rafts. Porch lights flickered, spit, and died. A white SUV carved twin lines through wet gravel and stopped at the water's edge. Karen stepped out. Even from where I stood, I could read every inch of her body saying, "This is not happening to me." It was not a wave. It was not drama. It was a tide turning. Steady. Inch. 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 It was a calm, stubborn truth. Water returns to the place carved for it. Voices carried. Orders went from barked to pleaded. A construction guy rolled his eyes at gravity like it was a dumb coworker. Near sunset, the lake had climbed close to 5 feet. Cabins that smelled like new were now swamp coolers. Drywall turning to oatmeal. Brand new couches wearing brown mustaches of silt. About then, a cruiser pulled into my drive. The same deputy stepped out, hat in hand. Tired already, Karen stumbled out of the passenger seat, pointing up the hill like she was casting a spell. "He's flooding us," she shrieked. "Arrest him. He's destroying our property." I handed the deputy a bottle of cold water and walked him through the house like a museum guide with exactly one exhibit. The certified mail receipt with her signature. The deed with the flood easement language. Angus's journal talking about the natural maximum elevation. The inspection checklist. The maintenance log. The plotted elevations of every unlawful slab. The photos with the contour line. The 48-hour notice. The deputy drank like a man discovering ice on a hot day, and then exhaled a long, low whistle that said, "This ain't what I was told." We walked back out onto the porch. I pointed toward the little archipelago of deeds and hubris bobbing at my shoreline and said, "Deputy, all I see is someone dumped 100+ illegal structures into my flood easement and ignored a lawful maintenance notice." He took a slow walk back down to Karen. I couldn't hear the words, but I recognized the posture. A human being who has to tell another human being that her crown isn't real. Karen's face tightened into something small and sharp. She jabbed a finger toward the lake. Toward me. Toward the sky. Like maybe God would come testify. The deputy kept his voice even, his hands open. Then he got back in his car and drove off, leaving taillights that blinked like a shrug. I left the gates where they were and let the lake find its old shoulders. Night came on soft. The water took back cabin after cabin. Not angry, just sure. By morning, the panorama looked like the world's saddest brochure. Rows of modern rectangles wearing dirty collars of water. Porch furniture trying to float. A kayak half wedged under a deck designed for sunsets that would now be enjoyed by fish. Insurance adjusters came, saw the fraudulent survey, the missing permits, the bulldozed buffer, and set down their clipboards. Gross negligence, one of them said in a voice that didn't care if anybody liked it. The investors pulled spreadsheets and frowned at the word uninsurable. The homeowners, good people, many of them, who wanted a peaceful life, realized their dues had been spent on a project parked smack in the middle of a lawsuit. And the lawsuits came. Class actions with names long as sermons. Everybody sued everybody. The developer sued the contractor. The contractor blamed the surveyor who, the redbugs, technically didn't exist as far as the licensing board was concerned. The HOA tried to pretend the word easement was invented yesterday. It was a legal square dance where everyone stomped the same two toes. Karen was voted out at an emergency meeting. The sort where coffee tastes like panic. The white SUV left the gate for the last time and did not return. Lakeview Crest HOA declared bankruptcy soon after that. Couldn't withstand the weight of fees, claims, and shame. Summit and Pine sold the remaining land to a conservation trust for pennies on the brochure dollar, trying to cauterize the wound before the next earnings call. As for me, I left the lake at the full natural mark for a month. Not out of spite, out of lesson, out of safety. Out of the need to be sure every joint of stone felt the old pressure and answered with the same low grunt it had for nearly a century. The water, patient as a grandmother, did what water does. It found seams in cheap work and widened them. When I finally stepped back into the gallery and turned those iron wheels in the other direction, slow, steady, hundreds of turns, the lake exhaled. Over half a day, the shoreline retreated to the usual 1,838-foot smile. And the damage showed its teeth. 139 cabins sat peeled and sagging like cardboard in a drizzle. Drywall bowed. Floors cupped. Appliances rusted at the edges like old pennies. A sweet rot smell hung over the place. A perfume, fine brochure don't list. The HOA was gone. The developer was gone. What remained were 139 very illegal, very ruined structures on the McLeod lakebed. I hired a salvage crew and a demolition team. We pulled copper and steel like miners in reverse. Stacked lumber for grinding. Hauled hazard after hazard to where it belonged. It took the better part of a year and cost a number I will not share because 9. My blood pressure doesn't need it. We paid the bills with scrap sales. Later, with a court judgment against the developer's parent company for trespass and damages. The judge read the record, looked at the photos, shook his head once, and wrote numbers that finally felt like honesty. When the last rectangle was gone and the last nail picked from the mud, I brought in a restoration ecologist from the university. She wore boots that meant business and smiled like the hills were old friends. We replanted native oak and maple, tucked in willow where the creeks flirt with the lake, laid in native grasses that would hold the shore like a good hug. 2 years later, you could paddle past and never guess there'd been a street sign that once said Cabin 11. Now and then, a canoe slips by from the reorganized HOA new board. Older souls. Humbler tone. Folks wave up at the lodge. I wave back. We all understand something now that should never have needed a lesson paper. Doesn't argue with gravity for long. I didn't set out to be a hero or a villain. I set out to be left alone with a good dam, a decent dog, and a view my great-great-grandfather earned stone by stone. Karen saw a lake to monetize. I saw a responsibility. She mistook patience for weakness. But patience is just strength, breathing slow. Anyway, that's the bones of it. If you want to hear the messy middle, the phone calls, the boardroom whispers, the day I found the forged seal. Sit tight for a second. Let me back up and walk you through the human part conversations on porches, the smell of sawdust, the way an email can look polite and still feel like a shove. The first real conversation I had with Karen wasn't a conversation so much as a performance with one audience member. She rolled up to the chain across my service road in that spotless SUV, and the window slid down like a stage curtain. "Hi there," she said, voice bright enough to bleach. "We're getting such wonderful feedback about the lake. We'd really love to host a 4th of July community picnic on the beach." I pointed at the No Trespassing McLeod Trust sign and said, "There's no public beach. There's McLeod Lake and a shoreline owned by the McLeod Trust. Folks are welcome to enjoy the view from their side of the line." She tilted her head, smiled harder. "We're all neighbors, aren't we? Neighbors respect fences." I said, "My daddy taught me that. His daddy taught him. Fences can be, you know, negotiated. Property lines ain't a potluck." I said, "They're surveyed." The window slid up. The SUV turned around. Gravel popped under expensive tires. A day later, everyone in Lakeview Crest got a cheerful email about working together to share our blessings. That was the mood for months. Sugary notes that tasted like lemon rind if you read them twice. Then I found the fake plat at the county office, and my patience stepped into its work boots. I remember the records clerk, a woman with readers on a chain. She slid the document across to me and said, "Who? Never saw this one come through." I held the paper up to the light, looked at the seal, read the signature, and felt a hot, stupid thud behind my eyes, the feeling you get when someone lies to your face and expects you to thank them for the story. Back home, I called Sam. He listened, made 2 little noises that sounded like punctuation, and said, "Bring it." When he read the name of the surveyor, he let out a low whistle. This fella's license got yanked after that downtown garage fiasco. He tapped the paper. Once. You can always count on arrogance to choose lazy. Documented. Jack. Do not yell. Do not go on Facebook. Document. We'll send a letter that will age like iron. We sent the letter. And like I told you, Karen turned it into a prop for her clubhouse speech. She said, disgruntled local, like it was a disease. She said our lake, like she owned pronouns. And the board, we bless them, clapped like they were trying to scare off a bear. I'm not above theater. So I did some too quiet theater with cameras. I set up a little time-lapse rig hidden in a cedar that watched the sightline. I flew the drone at legal height. Logged lat long. Took photos at consistent times of day for clean comparisons. I put chalk marks on rocks at the normal waterline and photographed them with a measuring stick each morning. If there's one thing an engineer knows, it's that a judge likes a straight ruler. Meanwhile, the construction trailers multiplied. Guys in ball caps ate lunch on tailgates and tried not to look toward the lodge. One of them, a kid with a Tennessee ball cap faded to pink, waved at me one evening at dusk. I waved back. Nothing was his fault. He was swinging a hammer where a rich lady told him to swing it. I called the state environmental desk. A woman named Carla answered and said, "Tell me, slowly." I did. She made the kind of sounds I make when I see someone using duct tape on plumbing. "We'll issue a notice," she said. "They're supposed to maintain a buffer. And they know it." The notice went out. A copy came to me. The paper looked official. The result looked like a shrug. I also called the power company, because if you're building 100+ rentals, you better be talking to the people who run the lines and the county septic office, because Pooh has a way of revealing whether a plan is real. Both offices answered in voices that said, "We have not been looped in the way we like." By the time those folks got rolling, the cabins had roofs. Late one Friday, Karen herself drove up the maintenance lane again. She didn't get out. She just sat there. Engine running. Window down. "You don't have to be the bad guy," she called. Like we were in a play, and she'd skip to the end. "Let the community have what it needs. You could even be a hero." I leaned on the fence post and said, "Heroes don't flood other people's land with rental units." Then I probably said a few words my granddad would not put in a letter. She left a streak of gravel behind. That was the day I realized she wasn't built to stop. You know how some folks hear "no" and translate it into "try again"? But bigger. That was Karen. A hard truth about people like that: they don't believe in consequences. They believe in outcomes. If they get the outcome they like, they call it virtuous. If they don't, they call it sabotage. And there I was. An inconvenient human gravity well sitting between her mood board and her brochure. The 48-hour notice wasn't a stunt. It was safety, law, engineering, and fairness printed in ink. It said, in so many words, the dam will be returned to full natural level for inspection. It also said the quiet part out loud. Everything you built on the lakebed is about to learn what lakebed means. The morning of the rise, I walked the dam like a ship's captain. The gallery's concrete sweated a little cool air kissing warm body. Every bolt looked like a period at the end of a sentence written by a serious man. I set my hands on those wheels and started a story Angus had given me in a leather book. You already know the pictures. Water lifting. Slabs turning islands. Panic turning from confused to loud. Karen turning purple around the edges. The deputy turning pages of a notebook like a man who wants to make sure the commas are in the right place. And me turning iron. Steady. That night on the ridge, after the deputy left, a group of owners trudged up my drive with flashlights. 4 of them, bundled in rain jackets, against a mist that wasn't rain. One spoke gray beard, flannel shirt, voice like a school principal. "Mr. McLeod, He said, "We didn't know about the license thing. We didn't know about the easement. We just wanted, a place with trees." "I know," I said. "I can see it in your eyes. We paid a premium for a view. And someone sold you mine." I said, "I'm sorry they did." A woman in the group, soft voice, tired eyes, said, "What happens now?" I said. "Water returns to where it belongs. And then lawyers do, too." She laughed once. Not from happiness. They thanked me for talking. I thanked them for asking. We stood there a minute listening to frogs. Then they walked back down through the mist with flashlights pinched in their hands like memory. When the lawsuits began, papers came like a flock of white birds landing on a pond. Flutter. Flutter. Flutter, each with a tone that said, "We are very serious." Depositions overflowed the conference room at the county building. Lawyers in blue suits asked me the same question 7 ways. I answered with the same truth 7 times. The natural maximum elevation is 1,845 feet. Our deed specifies ownership of the lake bed up to that mark. The cabin sat within that space. We notified. We raised the water for maintenance and inspection. Did you intend to damage the structures? I intended to maintain the dam. I said. The water did the rest. Did you enjoy it? That one made me blink. Sir. I said. I enjoyed watching my great-great-grandfather's work breathe like it's supposed to. I did not enjoy the mess. I did not enjoy people crying on my driveway. Sam squeezed my elbow under the table, his way of saying, "Good." Boring is better in court. We subpoenaed emails. We got minutes. We saw, in black and white, the board talking about claiming the shoreline for community use and pressing the timeline forward before any injunction. We saw the developer telling them to handle the owner, and a board member replying, "He's just a bachelor with an old house." We saw the fake survey slide across email like a baited hook. And we saw, in one especially telling line, a note from Karen. Once the cabins are in, no judge will tear them down. They'll call it an eyesore to lose them. I mean, she wrote the plot in a sentence. The insurance denials arrived in language so painfully polite it squeaked. Coverage excluded for knowingly unlawful construction within a documented flood easement. The investor's tone changed from confident to clipped. The HOA's tone changed from cheery to panicked. And in the middle of all that tone, the water just sat where it always could have sat, waiting for paper to catch up. The day the HOA voted to remove Karen, they sent me a letter with 2 sentences that read like they were written halfway through a sigh. "We recognize the McLeod Trust's rights and responsibilities regarding the dam and lake bed. We sincerely regret any overreach." I read it on the porch, put it in a folder, and then walked down to the gallery to put my hands on iron. Because apologies are nice, but maintenance is better. Lowering the lake is harder on the shoulders than raising it. You're working against your own impulse to hurry. Patience is the tool. The iron turns. The indicator needle creeps the other way. The outflow widens. The creaks become conversation again. I stood there counting breaths between clicks, like a monk counting beads. When the water settled to normal, I took a slow canoe lap along the stripped shore. The cabins sagged in postures that looked almost human, defeated, embarrassed, surprised to discover they were not immune to physics. I drifted past cabin 27, where a raccoon had found entry and left muddy little handprints like an autograph. I took photos for the record. I said a quiet apology to the trees it would take years to replace. The demo crews came with kind dignity. They didn't laugh. They didn't gawk. They just got to work. The foreman, big man, gentle voice said, "We'll be tidy." And they were. When they found a box of family photos in one of the units, apparently someone had staged a private weekend before the catastrophe, they handed it to me like it was a baby bird. I tracked down the owner from a forwarding address and sent it back with a note that said, "I hope memory hurts less than the present." A reporter called. I said no thanks. She called again. "People want to know how this happens," she said. "It happens slow," I said. "Like rot. One shortcut at a time." "Do you blame anyone?" she asked. "Everyone and no one," I said. "Every person who clapped when a line got moved on paper. Every soul who said civil dispute when it was really a map. Every guy like me who waited an extra week because he didn't want to be the bad neighbor. And me for enjoying the quiet too much to start a feud before it became a war." "Would you do it different?" she asked. "I'd buy brighter flagging tape sooner," I said. We both laughed. A little. Then I hung up. Because the dam doesn't care about quotes. A year after the cleanup, the shore woke up different. Spring light ran higher in the trees. The young willows threw green like confetti. The restoration ecologist, her name's Dr. Four, Elena Foster, stood with me at the cove where the volleyball court was supposed to go and smiled. "You gave the land back its edges," she said. "Edges are where life happens. I thought life happened in the middle," I said, half teasing. "In textbooks," she said. "Maybe. In creeks and lakes. Edges matter. That's where shadow meets light. That's where minnows turn into fish." We planted little oaks that looked ridiculous in their green tubes, then stood there like proud fools admiring sticks. The tubes keep deer from chewing dreams down to nubs. I checked them every week for the first summer. By fall, the tubes rattled with leaves when the wind decided to gossip. One evening, I was stacking wood when a canoe slid closed. A man in his 70s, hat as old as my truck, said, "You McLeod, I am." I said, "My daughter lives in the estates now. New board. Different energy. They told me to tell you thanks. You don't owe me that." I said, "I know." He said, "They said tell him anyway." He grinned. And they said ask him to come to the fall cookout on our side of the line. Naturally, I told him I'd bring cornbread. He pumped his paddle like a handshake. I went. By the way, kept to the edge. Ate a paper plate of good food. And talked to 3 couples about bird feeders and boat ramps, and how rules are only good when they help neighbors be neighbors. A woman said, "We've learned our lesson." I said, "Good. Me too." She laughed. "What was yours?" I said. "Trust your gut when it says someone is measuring you for your own shirt." Every so often a newcomer asks me to tell the flood story. I'll say a sentence or two and then point to the shore. "There's the story," I say. Edges. Oaks. Water where water belongs. It ain't humble bragging. It's just the only ending I like. You want the personal coda. The one that's a little messy and human 'cause the internet likes tidy endings. But real life rarely shakes your hand that way. Karen moved to Florida. Far as I know, I got a certified letter from an out-of-state lawyer one winter asking for consideration on reputational harm. Sam wrote back, the legal equivalent of nope. A year later, a magazine did a short piece on HOA horror stories, and ours got a paragraph. They changed names, but everybody here knew who was who. I heard through the grapevine that pumps gossip like it's spring water, that Karen told friends she'd been sabotaged by locals who didn't understand progress. Maybe she believes that. Maybe believing that is the only way a person like that can sleep. The young deputy from that day on the porch, he's a sergeant now. We talk sometimes at the diner that does eggs right. He says he uses our story in training, tells rookies. Don't get shouted into picking a side when the law is patient. I like that line. I told him he could put it on a coffee mug and give me 5%. He laughed like a kid and said, "You don't drink enough coffee to deserve 5%. Sam retired last spring. He brought me a bottle of something brown. Good. And older than me. And we sat on the porch without talking for a long time. He finally said, "I think your great-great-granddaddy would have liked you." I said. He wrote the plan. I turned the wheel. Sam nodded. That's all any of us ever do, Doctor. Foster students come out once a semester to take samples. They look like ducklings in their waders. I stand back and let them measure downed wood and macroinvertebrates and whatever else proves a shoreline is healthy. When they're done, they ask if they can canoe. I say yes. They come back with phones full of heron photos and smiles that spread like dawn. The best, though, is this: some evenings, the lake goes perfectly still. And from the lodge, you can see upside-down mountains in the water. In those minutes, it feels like Angus is still somewhere in the gallery counting turns. Like my dad is a shadow on the service road with a shovel across his shoulder. Like time is just water choosing a path. So what's the lesson? If you need one to pin to your fridge, don't let anyone talk you out of the truth on your own deed. Don't let paper tricks erase iron pins. Don't mistake patience for surrender. And, if you happen to be the person holding the wheel to an old, honest machine, turn it slow, by the book, and let gravity do the arguing. It's better at it than any of us. One last thing. Folks sometimes ask me if I felt bad when those cabins went under. The honest answer is complicated and human. I felt bad for the workers. The couple who lost their photos. The decent neighbors who thought they were buying a lakeside dream and instead bought a membership in a lawsuit. I did not feel bad for the arrogance. The forged seal. The breezy emails. The speeches in the clubhouse. Water doesn't punish. It corrects. We were overdue for correction. That's the tale of how I fixed 139 HOA violations in one day by not touching a single board with a hammer, just by returning water to where the land said it could go, where the law said it could go, and where a man named Angus wrote that it should go when safety called. What would you do here? Anyone else had a HOA do this to you? Like, try to steal your shoreline with a smile? Drop your story below. Let's talk about edges, neighbors, and, yeah, the weirdly beautiful honesty of water.